The air in the solicitor's office was thick with a silence that screamed anticipation. Uncle Arthur, a man whose sneer was as legendary as his wealth, sat across from me, a self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. He truly believed he'd won. That I, his estranged nephew, the black sheep of the family, would leave empty-handed. He'd made sure of it, or so he thought. My own heart was a drum solo against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm of dread and a faint, foolish hope. After years of being ostracized, after every cutting remark and public humiliation, part of me still craved some semblance of recognition from him, even if it was just a nod of financial acknowledgement. Another part, the more cynical and realistic part, knew better. Arthur was a master manipulator, a puppeteer whose favorite pastime was watching others dance to his tune. And for years, his favorite puppet had been me. The solicitor, a precise woman with an equally precise haircut, cleared her throat. Her gaze swept over the room, lingering for a moment on Uncle Arthur's triumphant grin, then briefly on my tightly clasped hands. We are here today to read the last will and testament of the late Mr. Alastair Finch. Alistair, my great-uncle, the only one in the family who ever showed me an ounce of kindness. He was a quiet, eccentric man, a collector of forgotten things and whispered secrets. After my parents disowned me for choosing a path outside their rigid expectations, it was Alastair who offered me a place to stay, a warm meal, and most importantly a listening ear. He taught me about old books, about the constellations, and about the surprising resilience of the human spirit. He was my refuge, and his passing had left a void that no inheritance could ever fill. The solicitor began to read, her voice a calm drone against the rising tension. Legacies to distant cousins, charitable donations, a significant sum to his beloved cat sanctuary. Uncle Arthur shifted in his seat, his smirk widening with each passing clause that didn't mention my name. I felt a familiar burn in my chest, a mix of old wounds and fresh disappointment. This was it then. Just as I'd predicted. He had truly left me nothing. I braced myself for the inevitable, for Arthur's triumphant gaze, for the "I told you so" that would undoubtedly follow. My jaw tightened. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. And finally, the solicitor continued, her voice taking on a slightly different cadence, to my great-nephew Elias Vance, I bequeath the remainder of my estate, with one crucial non-negotiable stipulation. My head snapped up. Elias Vance. That was me. Uncle Arthur's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing to suspicious slits. The air crackled with a new kind of energy. The solicitor paused, adjusting her spectacles, and then, her voice clear and resonant, she read the words that would change everything. The solicitor's words hung in the air, a sudden, unexpected thunderclap in the meticulously quiet room. Uncle Arthur's face, moments before radiating smug triumph, contorted into a mask of disbelief and then, swiftly, rage. "What is this nonsense?" he spat, leaning forward, his knuckles white against the arms of his chair. Alastair wouldn't pull a stunt like this. He knew the family order. The solicitor, unperturbed, simply continued, her gaze fixed on the document in her hands. As per the express wishes of Mr. Alastair Finch, the remainder of his estate, including all properties, financial assets and intellectual property, is hereby bequeathed to Elias Vance, conditional upon the successful completion of a task outlined in a sealed document. This document, titled The Legacy of Lost Things, is to be opened only by Mr. Elias Vance, and in the presence of a witness, upon the conclusion of this will reading. My heart, which had just begun to slow its frantic beat, now hammered with renewed intensity. Task. Alastair always had a flair for the dramatic, a love for puzzles and riddles. This was so like him. But what kind of task? And what was in this legacy of lost things? Uncle Arthur pushed himself out of his chair, his face a mottled purple. This is preposterous. I demand to see that document. He was clearly senile at the end, making such ridiculous demands. The solicitor met his furious gaze with a calm, unwavering stare. Mr. Finch was of sound mind, Mr. Arthur. His wishes are legally binding. The sealed document is for Mr. Vance's eyes only, as stipulated in the will. She then turned to me, offering a small, almost imperceptible smile. From a locked briefcase beside her, she produced a heavy leather-bound journal, its cover worn and its pages slightly yellowed with age. It looked familiar, almost exactly like the kind of journals Alistair used to jot down his odd observations and cryptic notes. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached out and took it from her. The leather felt cool against my skin. It was heavier than I expected. Uncle Arthur scoffed, throwing his hands up in exasperation. A silly journal. What could possibly be in there that's worth the entire estate? It's a trick, I tell you, a ploy to keep me from what is rightfully mine. But the solicitor had already turned her attention back to me. Mr. Vance, if you would, please open the document now. With a deep breath, I broke the fragile seal. The faint scent of old paper and something else, something faintly metallic, wafted from within. I opened the journal to the first page. It wasn't a set of instructions, not directly. Instead, in Alistair's familiar, elegant script, was a single, cryptic sentence. The true value of a thing is not what it is, but what it reveals. Beneath it, a single beautifully drawn illustration. A compass rose, but instead of the cardinal directions, each point was labeled with a symbol I didn't immediately recognize. Uncle Arthur snorted, clearly unimpressed. See? Nonsense. He's playing games from beyond the grave. But I wasn't listening to him. My gaze was fixed on the drawing, my mind already racing, trying to decipher Alistair's last puzzle. This wasn't just about money, I realized. This was about something more profound, something he wanted me to discover. My fingers traced the lines of the compass rose, the strange symbols etched into the aged paper. They weren't letters nor numbers, but something more primal, almost archetypal. The first at the top, where north should be, was a spiral. A tight, inward coiling design that seemed to hum with silent energy. To its right, replacing east, was a single open eye, unblinking and watchful. Below it, at south, was a key, old and ornate, the kind you might find in a forgotten chest. And finally, replacing west, was a stylized tree, its roots deep and its branches reaching outwards. Uncle Arthur, still fuming, watched me like a hawk, trying to decipher my silent contemplation. What is it, Elias? Some childish scribble. A game of I Spy. His voice dripped with disdain. I ignored him, my mind already sifting through memories of Alistair. He loved symbols, believed they held power and hidden meanings. The spiral. It often represented journeys, evolution, the unfolding of life. The insight, truth, observation. Key, access, unlocking secrets, solutions. And the tree. Growth, connection, wisdom, perhaps even family, though that felt ironic given my current company. The true value of a thing is not what it is, but what it reveals, I murmured, recalling Alistair's initial inscription. He wasn't just giving me money. He was sending me on a quest. My gaze returned to the journal. Beneath the compass rose, in smaller script, was a short, almost poetic passage. Where winding paths begin to cease, and sight unveils forgotten peace. The iron guardian holds the key, beneath the steadfast ancient tree. I read it aloud, my voice barely a whisper, but loud enough for Arthur to hear. He snorted. Poetry. He's gone completely mad. You'll be chasing rainbows, Elias, while I consolidate his actual assets. But I felt a prickle of excitement, a familiar thrill that always accompanied Alistair's puzzles. Winding paths begin to cease. That sounded like an ending, a conclusion to something long and complicated. Sight unveils forgotten peace. Implied discovery, something hidden being brought to light. The iron guardian holds the key. This was the most concrete clue. Something made of iron guarding a key. And then, beneath the steadfast ancient tree. Specific location. My mind raced back to Alistair's sprawling, eccentric estate. He had a vast garden, almost a wild forest in places, filled with overgrown paths and hidden nooks. and trees, countless trees. But steadfast ancient tree. That narrowed it down. Suddenly a memory sparked. There was an old gnarled oak at the very edge of his property, its branches reaching like ancient arms towards the sky. It was the oldest tree on the estate, a silent witness to generations. And beneath it, I remembered a small, weathered iron gate, rarely used, almost swallowed by ivy, leading to a forgotten section of the garden that Alastair always called the Silent Grove. A perfect iron guardian. Could that be it? The solicitor cleared her throat, breaking my reverie. Mr. Vance, do you understand the parameters of the task? I looked up, a newfound determination hardening my features. I believe so. My eyes met Uncle Arthur's. His face was still a storm of anger and suspicion, but now a sliver of doubt seemed to flicker in his eyes. He clearly hadn't anticipated this. Well, he sneered, though the conviction in his voice seemed to waver slightly. Go on then. Chase your wild geese. I'll be here waiting for you to fail, Elias. You always do. I closed the journal, holding it tightly. Not this time, Uncle. The solicitor's office now felt suffocating. I needed air, needed to move, to follow the thread of Alastair's last puzzle. Uncle Arthur's furious sputtering faded into the background as I made my excuses and left, the leather-bound journal clutched tight in my hand. The cool autumn air outside was a welcome shock, clearing my head. Alastair's estate, a grand, rambling Victorian house, was about a 30-minute drive from the city. The journey felt both incredibly long and impossibly short. Every turn, every familiar landmark, pulled me deeper into memories of my great-uncle. I remembered walks with him through his sprawling gardens, him pointing out rare plants, telling me stories about the trees, each one seemingly having its own personality in his eyes. As I drove through the wrought iron gates of the estate, the house loomed, beautiful yet silent. It was always a place of quiet contemplation for Alastair, but now it felt imbued with a new, urgent purpose. I bypassed the main entrance and drove around to the back, to the less manicured, wilder parts of the garden. The gravel crunched under my tires as I navigated the winding, overgrown drive. The steadfast ancient tree immediately came to mind, though it stood sentinel at the furthest edge of the property, its enormous canopy a landmark against the sky. As I approached, its sheer size was even more imposing than I remembered, its bark a tapestry of deep furrows and moss. And there it was, nestled amongst the low-hanging branches and thick ivy at the base of the oak. The iron gate. It was old, rusted, its intricate scrollwork almost swallowed by the relentless embrace of nature. This was the entrance to what Alastair affectionately called the Silent Grove, a neglected corner of the estate where wild roses tangled with ancient stones, and the sounds of the world seemed to fall away. I pushed against the gate. It groaned in protest, a long, drawn-out shriek of rusty hinges, but it held firm. Of course, the Iron Guardian holds the key. I knelt, running my hands along the cold, rough iron. The gate itself was a work of art, despite its decay. Intricate spirals of metal intertwined, forming patterns that seemed familiar. I remembered the spiral symbol from the compass rose in the journal. Was it just a coincidence, or was Alastair hinting at something more? I pulled out the journal and flipped back to the compass rose. The spiral was at the top, representing north, in Alastair's cryptic map. But how did it relate to this gate? I ran my fingers over the iron again, searching for anything unusual. A latch, a hidden mechanism, anything that might suggest a way to open it without a physical key. My eyes scanned the ground around the gate, then moved upwards, tracing the ivy-covered stone wall that flanked it. The wall was old, built from rough-hewn local stone, and some of the blocks were loose. My gaze followed the spiral pattern on the gate itself, then drifted to the ivy. It was thick, almost a curtain. Then I saw it. Tucked deep within a particularly dense cluster of ivy, just beside the upper hinge of the gate, was a small, almost imperceptible depression in the stone wall. It was shaped like a keyhole, but not a conventional one. It was too small, too oddly shaped. It was designed to receive something specific, something unusual. And beside it, partially obscured by a tendril of ivy, was a faint, carved spiral. My breath hitched. This wasn't a standard key. This was a puzzle. The Iron Guardian holds the key. Not that it has the key, but that it is the key, or rather, it reveals the key. I examined the keyhole more closely. It was narrow, with a distinct twist to its design, mimicking the spiral. My eyes darted to the compass rose in the journal once more. The symbols weren't just directions. They were clues themselves. The key symbol was at the bottom of the compass rose, representing south. Was the keyhole on the gate somehow connected to the symbols on the compass? I began to methodically search the area, my focus sharpened. If the gate itself was the Iron Guardian, and the keyhole was this peculiar spiral shape, then the key had to be hidden nearby, and it had to conform to that specific design. I swept away fallen leaves, pushed aside branches, my hands gently probing the earth around the base of the mighty oak. The air grew cooler, heavier, as I pushed deeper into the silent grove. The path, barely discernible, wound through a dense tapestry of ferns and moss-covered stones. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy of leaves, casting the grove in a perpetual twilight. Every step echoed with the soft crunch of fallen leaves, and the only other sounds were the distant chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves in a barely there breeze. It felt ancient, sacred, a place forgotten by the modern world. Alistair had always loved this part of the estate, calling it his thinking place. He'd spent hours here, often sketching or simply observing the quiet ballet of nature. I remembered him telling me stories of the grove, tales of hidden springs and rare nocturnal flowers. He believed this place held secrets, and now it seemed it held his secrets. I consulted the journal again, the single cryptic sentence echoing in my mind. Where winding paths begin to cease, and sight unveils forgotten peace, the Iron Guardian holds the key, beneath the steadfast ancient tree. I had unlocked the Iron Guardian, the gate which had been beneath the steadfast ancient tree. Now I needed to find where winding paths begin to cease, and where sight unveils forgotten peace. The path I was on was winding, meandering aimlessly through the dense growth. I pushed aside thorny branches, careful not to tear the journal. After what felt like an eternity, the trees began to thin slightly, and the winding path opened into a small, circular clearing. This was it. Where winding paths begin to cease. In the center of the clearing stood a solitary stone bench, weathered and green with moss, almost swallowed by the surrounding foliage. It was the only man-made object in this wild sanctuary. I remembered this bench. Alistair would often sit here, sketching in his journals. As I approached the bench, my gaze fell upon a small, flat stone embedded in the earth directly in front of it. It was almost completely covered by a layer of fine dirt and moss, but a faint, familiar outline was visible beneath. I knelt, carefully brushing away the debris with my hand. Beneath the dirt, clearly etched into the stone, was the symbol of the open eye. The same symbol that had been on the compass rose, representing east. And sight unveils forgotten peace. My breath hitched. The eye, symbol of observation and insight. What was I meant to see here? I looked around the clearing, my eyes sweeping over every detail. The mossy trees, the dappled light, the silent stone bench. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing seemed to reveal anything. I sat on the cold, damp bench, facing the carved eye. I closed my own eyes, trying to clear my mind to think as Alistair would. He always said that true sight wasn't just about looking, but about perceiving. I opened my eyes again, focusing on the small, carved eye on the stone. It seemed to stare back, unblinking. I leaned closer, examining the stone itself. It was ordinary gray stone, but the carving felt significant. Then I noticed it. Just at the very edge of the carved eye, almost imperceptible against the texture of the stone, was a faint hairline crack. It wasn't a natural fissure. It was too straight, too precise. It was a seam. My heart began to pound. Was this stone not just a marker, but a cover? I ran my fingers along the seam. It was incredibly tight, almost invisible. I tried to push, to lift, to twist, but it wouldn't budge. I remembered the key from the compass rose. I had used a spiral to unlock the gate. What was the key to this? I thought about Alistair's love for illusions, for things hidden in plain sight. Sight unveils forgotten peace. Perhaps the key was something visual, something that once seen, allowed the forgotten piece to be revealed. I looked around the clearing again, taking in the entire panorama from my vantage point on the bench. My gaze lingered on the magnificent trees, the patterns of light and shadow, the way the branches intertwined. And then my eyes caught on something specific. On the trunk of the largest tree directly opposite the bench, about eye level, was a cluster of unique markings. They weren't carved, but seemed to be naturally occurring patterns in the bark, swirls and lines that, when viewed from the precise angle of the bench, formed a distinct, almost ethereal shape. It was the shape of an hourglass. Not the sand running, but the outline, the two triangles connected at their points. An hourglass. It wasn't a physical key, but something to be observed. I looked back at the stone with the carved eye. Then I looked at the hourglass shape on the tree. Thoughts sudden and clear hit me. What if the focus was the key? What if I needed to align something? I lifted the journal, holding it open to the compass rose, aligning the journal with the hourglass on the tree. The open eye on the compass rose seemed to align perfectly with the carved eye on the stone. As I held the journal in that specific alignment, focusing my gaze from the carved eye on the stone, through the journal's compass rose, and then to the hourglass on the tree, a faint click echoed through the silent grove. The small stone with the carved eye slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to rise from the earth. Beneath it, nestled in a small dry cavity, was a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was no larger than my hand, made of dark polished wood, with no visible seams or openings. My hands trembled as I reached for it. This was the forgotten piece that sight had unveiled. This was the next step. Alistair's final, elaborate gift. I knew with absolute certainty that Uncle Arthur was still back at the solicitor's office, fuming, convinced I had failed. He had no idea what wonders Alistair had truly left for me to discover. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about a legacy, a final conversation, a journey of discovery that only Alistair could have orchestrated. The true value of a thing was not what it was, but what it revealed. And this box, I knew, would reveal much more.